Hello world, it's Nerd Shaman, and I'm here to tell you we are going to start presenting a lot more Evolver content now that much more of the game is ready to be discussed, and we're going to do that through a series called Evolver School. You can learn about Evolver, and more importantly, we'll be doing a competition series where you can earn cash as well as other prizes just for winning this game. So let's dig in. For episode 1 of Evolver School, we'll discuss the core mechanics of Evolver that drive Neutral and separate Evolver from other fighting game experiences. In Evolver, there is no block button. But don't panic, there are a metric fun ton of other defensive options. To keep things logical, the defensive options in Evolver are mapped to the left-hand triggers. The dodging mechanic Evade Burst is mapped to L1 or LB, and Repulse Burst, the parry mechanic, is mapped to L2 or LT. In Evolver, nearly everything that isn't a normal attack is a burst. This ties directly to the lore of the anime world that Evolver is set in. Each quadrant of the face buttons of the controller is mapped to the corresponding position of the triggers. So the PlayStation's triangle and square buttons trigger the same function as L1, and the cross and circle buttons trigger the same function as L2. Evade Burst and Repulse Burst make up 2/3 of the core mechanics of Evolver. The third part of the trifecta is the Detect Burst. Detect Burst is mapped to R1 or RB and performs a standard fighting game throw attack when pressed. These three burst types create the fundamental rock, paper, scissors of Evolver. When your character does an Evade Burst, they are concealing their presence and moving a small distance during which you are invulnerable to most attacks. However, attacks that channel the Detect Burst ability, such as Throw, can be used to detect a concealed presence. Thus, Throw beats Dodge. You can press the Throw button when you're grabbed to detect the throw and return to neutral. Successful throws will free synergy from your opponent. Free synergy will seek out the nearest non-hit stun player, so by continuing the combo, you can guarantee extra meter. Keep in mind that the later into a combo a throw occurs, the more time there is to tech it. Likewise, if you sense that your opponent is going to throw, you can parry with Repulse Burst. Repulse Burst uses the same principle as Detect Burst, but rather than detecting your opponent's presence, you detect their intent. In-game, this works as a parry that repels your opponent's attacks and sets you to the end of your recovery frames. With proper timing, you can punish your opponent for committing to moves with longer recoveries. All Detect Burst throws have over 30 frames between hits, and therefore plenty of punish time if parried with Repulse Burst. Finally, if you know your opponent is going to try and parry with Repulse Burst, you can use an Evade Burst to interrupt them. Repulse Burst requires an iron will and stance, but by passing through your opponent with Evade Burst, you will knock them up and off their balance. While this does not apply hit stun, it can give you a big advantage if your opponent is slow to respond. Additionally, if you do interrupt a Repulse Burst with Evade Burst, you will free synergy from the opponent. These essential bursts all have cooldowns that can be monitored in the HUD. Evade Burst can be performed once per second, and Detect Burst can be performed once every 3 seconds. Repulse Burst can be performed repeatedly until the gauge is depleted. Successfully repelling an attack with Repulse Burst refills the meter by about 50% of its cost. The more tightly timed your Repulse Burst actions are to the opponent's attacks, the more attacks you'll be able to repel in a row. Though you can only fail 2 or 3 Repulse Bursts before completely emptying the gauge in neutral, successfully repelling attacks is generally the fastest way to fill the synergy gauge. And that's it! Those are the core mechanics that make up Evolver's neutral, but there are so many things that take the game to deeper and deeper levels. Look out for episode 2 of Evolver School, as well as all the other things the world of Evolver has in store.